This is episode number 138, featuring Linda Glover Gooch, which has a real surprise at the ending. As a matter of fact, I was totally floored, totally surprised. You don't want to miss this.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. My name is Eric, as he said, and I have been feverishly working on the last issue of PleinAir magazine. It's not just me, of course. As a matter of fact, it's very little of me. Most of it is our editor, Kelly Kane, who is just absolutely amazing. Anyway, you should have it in the mail by now. But I'm sure proud to have her on the team, and she's doing just a great job with PleinAir magazine. If you're not a subscriber to PleinAir magazine and you're listening to this is kind of where it all happens. PleinAir magazine is for collectors. It's for artists. It is giving you the kind of the lowdown on the plein air world, what's happening in this movement. It's been a busy summer, and we've been finalizing the lineup for the PleinAir convention. We've added a lot of artists since you last looked, and we've already exceeded the number of people that we had at the last convention. As a matter of fact, considerably more already. And the Denver event is going to be the biggest and most popular in history, maybe because of the lineup with the headliners like Scott Christensen, Kwang Ho, Daniel Sprick, many, 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 many more. Jill Carver. Wow, that's pretty cool. Anyway, we've got 5 stages. We're going to be painting around the Rocky Mountain National Park and other places, some amazing, beautiful areas. You just got to go. If you're on the fence, just do it. Don't want to miss it. Got to get your seat now. This is going to be the biggest one ever, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Just a really beautiful place to paint. And we're even playing with some ideas about coming up with something special for after the convention because there's so much to paint out there, and we'll tell you about that once we come up with it. Actually, we haven't done it yet. So treat yourself, join the PleinAir family, and you can learn more at PleinAirConvention.com. And you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff if you're not there. Everybody always tells me, I can't believe I would have missed this. I'm getting pretty excited. Fall's going to be a lot of fun. And about 6 weeks from now, I'm going to be hosting my Fall Color Week Publishers Invitational at the Ghost Ranch, which has been sold out for weeks. Then I'm heading to France, and I'm leading a group of art collectors through the south of France, Provence, Nice, and to see where many of the great artists worked and lived. And I'll take you behind the scenes to places that you cannot get into as a tourist. You know, things like private homes, private collections. We opened some pretty cool doors, and we do have a couple of seats left from what I can tell, and that may or may not be, by the end of the day, they may be gone. So check that out at finearttrip.com. Also, you know, I don't talk about PleinAir magazine very much. I think I've kind of assumed you have it, but lately I've run into a lot of people who actually don't get it yet, and people all over the world who are listening to the podcast. There are tens of thousands of artists and collectors who've joined the PleinAir movement, and you can follow now by getting PleinAir magazine published bi-monthly in print and digital formats. And something that is not really talked about very much, but because there's so many people around the world who get it digitally, and people who also get subscriptions where they have print and digital, the digital edition has 20% more content in it. So actually, if you get the digital edition, there's stuff in there that you will not find in the print edition, because print is, of course, expensive. And so there's only so much you can do, and you got to mail it and everything else. So what a lot of people do is they get the print edition and the digital edition. That way they can really dig into it. Anyway, you can subscribe today at PleinAirMagazine.com or pick one up at the newsstand. Did you know PleinAir is so hot, that PleinAir painting is so hot, is that PleinAir magazine is the #1 selling art magazine in America. Hard to believe. And #1 at Barnes & Noble throughout the United States. So get yours. Coming up after the interview, I'll be answering some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, a really fascinating interview with Linda Glover Gooch. Linda Glover Gooch, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be here.
You are a fabulous rock star painter. I get letters or emails from people say, don't use the word rock star, but you are really a fabulous painter. Congratulations on that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks.
That just happened overnight, didn't it? It just like one day you started painting and it just all of a sudden you were good, right?
Right. Yeah. I just thought, well, I think I'll do this today. And there it was. I wish it was like that.
So what was it like? What was your journey like? How did you decide you wanted to paint?
Well, I started at a very young age, actually, when I was 13.
Really?
And and I was at a friend's house and just was intrigued by the easel and the studio that was set up. And I went home and told my mom, they had all these brushes and these tubes of paints, and I was just drawn to it. And I told her I wanted to do it, and she went and bought me art supplies and put me in an art class, private art lessons.
And where was that?
That was in Ukiah, California. I was raised in Southern California.
And who did you study with? Anybody we would know?
No, I don't even remember her name, actually. I now, the story has changed as years have gone on because my mom put me in a Saturday morning class, and I used to think I painted on Saturday mornings with several, I used to say older ladies, but now I think they weren't all that old after all.
Yeah, well, now in hindsight, but well, when you're 13, you think somebody who's 20 is old.
Right. So I do not know who it was, but it was the start of me and my painting career, actually.
And your friend that had the easel set up, was that just a girlfriend, or was that the parent? Was it just somebody, a hobbyist?
It was an older sister of a friend of mine, and I think they were a hobbyist. They didn't really go anywhere with it, but they had little studios set up, and then it was what kind of drew me in.
Well, there's I had a conversation one night with Jacob Collins, who runs the Grand Central Academy in New York, and the conversation was about can a person become a highly accomplished artist in their lifetime, especially if they start late. And I remember that discussion and being very frustrated with it because I was older at the time and was kind of just early stage painting. And his take was, you really need to start when you're 13. And so, which I'm not sure I agree with him on that, but I think the more time and you're obviously an adult now, and you are the quality of your work is spectacular. So obviously there's something to that.
Well, I do believe there's truth in the fact of putting your hand to something for a long, lengthy time. You're going to, get better at it. That's just a principle. But I think desire, runs a big, major, heavy hand in that. Because as a teacher, over the years, I've been teaching for 20 years at the Scottsdale Artist School, and I would see students come in who were really gifted. And I can think of a couple that I thought, wow, this person is like, it kind of just flows out of them. But, they never got anywhere because that desire wasn't there.
Well, that's the attitude we have in our company. It's hire for attitude or hire for passion. And if they have the skill sets, that's great. If they don't, we train them. I think that's really true. You got to have passion, and the passion is what drives the learning, isn't it?
Right. I believe so too. I obviously, because painting to me is actually hard work, and you know that well because you've done it yourself, and it's not as the general public see people in this very romantic setting just painting away with your head in the clouds. Excuse me, but it's not that way. It's a lot of hard work, and passion does help keep that motivation going for sure.
And I think that hard work, though, is something that I look forward to, because when I struggle, that's when I grow.
Sure. I mean, we all learn from the things that, obviously, in life, too, the things that we do wrong, there are great lessons in it. But I think if it was easy, it could maybe get boring, too. And so there is that part about it that is truth about the work involved is gratifying, actually.
Absolutely. Well, anything good. I think we've had this belief, or I don't know why society tends to think this, but if you see a major surgeon, a brain surgeon, neurosurgeon, or something, and you know that they've spent many, many, many years in school and studying and practicing and learning, and we don't think twice about that. But there's this assumption that if you're an artist, you just have this natural talent. But we don't have that assumption about musicians. We don't have it otherwise. So how do you address that kind of thing with your students, or do you have that with them?
I do, because some of them do feel very frustrated, like, they're not getting anywhere. And for me in teaching, that's just a major thing that I make sure people, feel like they are growing and they are accomplishing things, because as a teacher, I really work to look at their strengths and get them focused on their strengths first, so that they start developing more of an attitude of, I can do this type of thing, and not be overwhelmed with the large picture of it all, but just to look at those areas where they're strong. Everybody has some kind of strengths, even the beginner, that they're stronger in. And so to me, that is my kind of protocol for teaching people, is to encourage them and show them, hey, this area is good, and, focus here and build that, and then start adding to that, because it's a large spectrum in, just creating a piece.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things an instructor can do is to kind of lay out a progress program early on, is to say, here's where you are today. Here's where we're going to try to take you by here and by there. And even though, you can't really map things out exactly, I think the idea of helping people understand that there is going to be a little bit of frustration, there is going to be a lot of work, I think that kind of, because we go into it oftentimes just thinking, well, this is going to be easy.
Right. Right. And I think that's true, because many of them say, I didn't realize it was so hard.
Yeah. Well,
they do.
Yeah. So talk to me about what you're teaching your students. We have a lot of people who are listening to this around the world who are trying to either learn plein air painting at early stage, and of course we've got a lot who are, they're already fairly accomplished, but they're trying to kind of get to the next level. It appears to me that the level that you're working is very high, and you probably took some leaps in your career. What stimulated those leaps? What are you teaching to help people get there?
Well, what stimulated my leaps probably was always following my heart and what intrigued me and what I was drawn to. So instead of, whether this is right or wrong, I didn't jump across the spectrum and go into a figurative class, go into a still life class, go into a landscape class, do this, do that. I kind of narrowed down what really appealed to me and what I felt was me. And so I started that direction and started focusing on, landscape painting, and plein air is such a great teacher, and took classes from people that I really liked their work, and I appreciated what they did, and it moved me. And so I spent several years, probably 20 years, of at least 3, maybe 4 workshops a year, but not overdoing, because one thing I tell people is take a class and then go practice what you've learned. Give yourself time to absorb what you just inherited, so to speak.
So you can become a little bit schizophrenic if you do too much of that hopping around and studying too many people.
I mean, for me, my personality and who, what I wanted to do, I think that there could be that. I think you can be, a jack of all trades and maybe a master of none. Now, I think when you get to a certain point in your painting, we're talking about beginners here, but when you get to a certain point in your painting abilities, I believe you can paint whatever you want to paint and do it well because you apply certain principles. But when a person first starts, I think that they can get themselves scattered across the board where they're struggling because there's just some things once you can start developing something in an area and let's say you get good at it. If you're figurative painting and that's what you want to do, you get good at that, then other areas will come with it, or vice versa. You're a landscape painter and you want to start developing. Get good at something so you are encouraged by it instead of just a lot of struggle in different areas. That's just how I approached it for me.
So would you recommend then that somebody kind of pokes around the internet, finds an artist whose work really resonates with them, a style that they want to emulate, not copy, and then look, just keep studying under that person for a while, or at what point do you say, okay, well, I've done enough workshops with Linda Glover Gooch, now I got to move over to this person or that person?
Well, I think that you can take from different teachers, but I just think that I think you do yourself well to judge yourself on how far out you go in direction. In the beginning, I'm talking about when you're learning, and I'm not saying just take from one person, but there's a lot of painters that probably paint similar to me. Let's say, if you like my style or whatever, there are similar teachers that paint similar way, opposed to going across the board now and go take a figurative class, and then jump over there and go try some watercolors, and then jump back over here. And do you understand what I mean by that? In engaging what you're doing is what I'm referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that variety is good, but when a person first starts, it's overwhelming. And I believe that they can do it in a methodical way where they're really paying attention. I've seen lots of people take class after class after class after class, and I personally think you need to give yourself a little time between classes and study.
Yeah.
Go, because people want to do their thing, and I tell them, if you want to find your voice, then you go take some classes, take a class, take two, then go practice what you learned. If you like some of the things that you picked up, keep it and mold it to fit your personality. Something that didn't work, chuck it. Get rid of it. Don't use it. But if you don't take what you learn in class and go back to the easel at home, this is the biggest problem I see, and I do get it. Setting up at home is work. You're even on your kitchen table for some students or different places, but it's part of the journey. Take it home and practice what you were taught, and then go take another class.
Well, I would even insert in that if you study under, let's say they study under you, and then you practice that for a year, you're going to start running into things that you forgot, that were taught to you that you can't remember, or they didn't sink in at the time. And I think that to some extent it's a good idea to go back to that same person and take another class from that same person until you really get to the point where you've mastered as much of what they can teach you as you possibly can. I know of artists who will study under the same teacher, 3, 4, 5 workshops in a row, and I now get that. I used to be all over the map, and I have this rare privilege of being able to slip in on the video shoots that we do. we do 30 or 40 a year, and I found myself changing my palette every other week because it was like, well, this person does that, I like that. Oh, here's a cool color, and so finally it was the idea of stabilizing on one thing and sticking with it, which I think is really helpful, and then going back to that artist time and again and getting a little bit more and more of what they learned. If that's somebody that you really feel like that, that's the closest thing to what I want to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that. I think that there is that at a point in time where then there will be others that you'll branch out to and you can grab information from them. But I just have seen that in talking about students and helping them getting started. I've seen many of them just kind of struggle because they're all over the board. And I'm trying to tell them when they come to my class, I teach landscapes at the school from photos now. And I say, pick something, and I take hundreds of photos for them there to work off of. And I always say, what excites you? I don't want to tell you what to paint today. I want to help you paint it. But what is it that excites you? Because when people go that route, it becomes them more and more investment from their heart, and it starts taking them down a path of what's true to themselves.
Do you think that it's important for somebody who wants to learn plein air painting to start out from photographs, so that in a controlled environment, so they learn how to paint before they learn how to paint with all the distractions and the the wind and the bugs and the everything else that comes with it, changing light?
Yeah, I think that could be an individual thing for people, because I love plein air painting and the teacher that it is. I do know that probably there's a benefit to somebody understanding their medium and understanding the color wheel. I push that, in my classes about people understanding that, and understanding the tools that they use. There is that element to me that would probably be a little bit of help for someone, but I would never stop somebody if they were like brand new and wanted to go plein air. I'd like, go for it, it is what it is. So I think it's an individual thing. I think that would be per person, really.
I certainly don't think stopping anybody is a good idea, but I also have watched people give up because of the frustration that occurs. And I think that just as a general rule, you need to learn how to mix color. You need to learn how to do values. You need a few basic things before you start going outdoors.
Yeah. I've had so many beginners in my plein air classes at the Grand Canyon that it's hard work. I was amazed at some of the people that showed up out there. I was like, wow, this is interesting, but they made their way through. And, I believe with a good teacher, you can get people through it.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of hard work, but you can.
Absolutely. Well, we have a thing called the Basics course that we do at the Plein Air Convention, which is a day and a half before the convention begins. Maybe it's just the day. I don't remember. I think it's a day and a half. And I'll bet we've had 50 people, 75 people who have done their first painting in their life doing it in plein air at the Plein Air Convention. But we at least had the opportunity to explain the principles to them, let them watch some demos, get a sense of the things that they're going to encounter outdoors before they go outdoors. And so I agree, there's not a right or a wrong. And quite frankly, anybody I can get plein air painting, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Right. It's cool. It's. I just tell people it's your best teacher.
And would you tell people why you believe that?
Because the truth is there. But you could apply that to still life painting or figurative painting, so it's more about life, painting from life, because you have the truth in front of you. Everything gets distorted through photography or flattened out, or, you know, that you don't smell it. You don't have the real sense of it. So that's why I tell them, and there are not everybody wants to plein air. And so I do tell my students, you can go and observe with your pen and paper and a camera. So if you're not going to plein air, this is probably a must, that you go out and you observe what light does on the mountains, the fields, the clouds, and make yourself notes. It will help them in their painting. So I just look at it as it being, because the truth is in front of you.
Yeah, George Carlson told me that he goes out and he sketches, and then he puts numbers that correlate to colors he uses. So because he doesn't always have a chance to go out plein air painting, but he can whip together a sketch, and then he'll, based on those numbers, he'll remember something that allows him to create it.
Right. Yeah, that would make that. That's sounds like my kind of person. I'm a little methodical that way too, kind of in an organized sense. I'm not one that just splashes paint everywhere. You know, I mean, I love watching artists that are like so free flowing and like it just develops. I'm a more methodical, maybe a little organized. I'm very tidy because I painted with babies under my easel and raised my kids under me. So just kind of stayed with me. But
well, tell me about that. What was that like, raising kids and trying to be a painter at the same time?
I started painting when I was 13, so really was just a part of my life. So it wasn't something that I thought, oh, can I do this with my kids? I just said I am doing this with my kids, and both my kids were born in Santa Fe, so I started, my first gallery was in Santa Fe, but before that we used to do what was called the art in the park there in this plaza in Santa Fe, and they were the weekend events. So I just had the kids with me, it was outdoor art shows, and had the playpens and the strollers, and it really just was normal life. My kids grew up as it being normal life. They all had access to their paints and things, which they probably, kind of took that for granted, where their friends would come and go, whoa, I want to paint, or that's cool, you can do that. But it was normal life. I didn't really think anything other. I just knew there was, you keep the kids away from the paint, and I learned how to paint a little bit neater, so I wasn't carrying it into the crib or whatever off my hands, but it was just normal life. I wanted to do it, so I knew I could do it.
I want to go back to the instruction for a minute. I'd like to know if you could sit down face to face with somebody who was a brand new plein air painter, and say, okay, I'm gonna give you a curriculum to follow. Here are some steps I want you to take. I want you to do this first, do this second. What would those things be?
If I have a brand new plein air painter out with me, I think the first thing I would tell them is think, even though you're outside, think intimately. Don't try to paint that whole scope of everything in front of you. But the first thing you're going to do is you're going to zoom up on a small, intimate area within the landscape. And you can even do that at the Grand Canyon, because I had to do this with beginner painters. So first you find an intimate point of interest in your scene, and that's where you start. And then, from that point, drawing, you get your drawing on, and then, move forward with your colors and the mixtures. But to me, the most important thing out there for a plein air painter when they're first starting is I push them to go intimate, because you can lose it across that whole landscape. And going intimate gives them that ample time of look at your shadows, block them in, and you don't chase the light. You don't change it. That's your established point. Does that answer your question?
What is your theory on shadows?
My theory on shadows?
Well, in terms of, because, you have a lot of variation in people who have shadows. Some people talk about keep your shadows transparent. Some people talk about make them purple or blue. Some people, it's the cool light, warm shadows, warm light, cool shadows, etc. Do you have a theory?
That depends on the landscape. Like, I do like the transparent dark for real earthy type areas and big heavy trees and things like that. But then when you get to the Grand Canyon and you're looking out across there, not the transparency doesn't work out across that very atmospheric area. So I think that is kind of based on, okay, where are we? What is that subject matter? And what is happening in the atmosphere?
All right. Now, you talk a lot about, actually do a 2-day workshop on thumbnails.
I do. It's coming up this month, yeah.
Yeah, and so I find that curious. What is the power of the thumbnail?
That is, for me, what I have found, and the reason why I started teaching it was because it helped me so much in developing my own paintings. A lot of times something you think could make a great painting, and you go to develop it on this 18 by 24, and you're like, I don't know, this isn't working. I don't like this after all. Where a thumbnail gives you a chance to get in and set a basic foundation of some very simple shapes for your composition, your palette, and your value structure. And you can see right away, oh, this is cool, I like this. Or you might find struggling in it. And I started developing thumbnails of many of my large paintings before I ever went to like a 30 by 40.
So how big?
I started doing it as a discipline.
How big is a thumbnail?
I do them anywhere from, I've even done 2 and 3 inch ones to 4 by 5 inches.
Yeah. So you're laying in basic shapes. Are you doing sketches before you do a thumbnail sketch? Or are you sketching on a pad, doing no tans or anything of that nature?
Uh-huh. In my studio, personally, I do. In the workshop, I don't, because it's 2 days, and we are really, I'm an oil painter teacher, so I don't necessarily teach the sketching part in my classes. I really focus in on getting people into the paint and the mixing of it and the values of it. I figure if they want to do the draw, sketching, pen and inks, then, they can do those in those classes, because that's another art in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I try to focus in what I really feel I can give a real strong foundation in just specific areas. When they're coming to paint from me, they're not looking at my note tans or my pencil sketches. They're drawn to what they're seeing me paint. So I feel like that's what they want. And so that's what I try to feed them.
I was wandering around your website and looking at your landscape work, and one of the things that I think you excel at, and you excel at many things, but your compositions are spectacular. Do you want to talk about creating compositions?
Well, I think the one thing I teach my students is I'm never married to a photograph, unless it was historic and I was required to keep it in exactly how it is, because nature is gorgeous, but sometimes in a painting you just need to rearrange that set of trees or those foreground bushes, or even get rid of a mountain range because it just is not working. So I've just learned to that's where my small sketches have been helpful and drawings have been helpful, to get rid of certain things and not be totally engaged in it's got to be like this photograph. So I've just learned to change them, and it's been by a trial and error thing. I don't have any magic thing that creates the perfect composition. It's called, that didn't work, scrape that out and try something else. Really, that's my journey.
Well, I notice you do a lot of low horizon, high cloud compositions. They're beautiful.
Oh, thank you. That was developed. How I ended up getting into that is actually just been about the last 3 years by PleinAir painting. I was at the Grand Canyon, and this huge, massive cloud started building out there, and I was mesmerized by it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to paint that. So in order to paint it, I had to pretty much ignore the canyon and just give myself, a horizon line and a few little ledges. And that cloud, it turned into a massive storm that, the electricity and everything went out, but I was back in the room by then. But it was probably an eye-opener for me about painting clouds and the sky, because I was probably a little handicapped because I felt like I had to have a clear blue sky and really bright light so I could build my landscape. But when that happened that day out there, I changed. It changed me, because I took that back to the room and I thought, that was amazing. It was only a little 8 by 10 or 9 by 12, but the cloud worked. It painted itself, and I was so inspired by it that I went back to the studio and I started developing, and I had many pictures that had clouds. I just was always, straying away from them, and that's kind of where that started.
I was reading a conversation on social media last night, and there was a dialogue about how many focal points can you have, and the people were battling that out. And it seems to me, in looking at your work, you have one focal point, one thing that you're trying to draw attention to, which in the case of the clouds is the clouds. And is that pretty much the way you think, or do you have some kind of a theory on that?
No, I do try to establish the strong focal point and then supporting characters, just like any good play or movie or, musical tune. There's something that's dominant in it. And so I do try to do that and then remain true to that, though enjoy the rest of the program, where I do just enough, I hope, that I don't over accentuate something, but just let balance be, so that it gives the viewer a journey, if you will, to enjoy other areas of it, but dominantly there is something to grab your eye and to draw you in is what I try to do.
So I'm going to go through a lightning round with you for a couple of things, and give me a couple of thoughts. Okay. All right. So we're putting it to the test. Painting clouds. Ideas, thoughts, techniques?
Stay away from white in the very beginning. Think more color. Sometimes people use too much white and it gets chalky. You might think you're seeing white, but there's way more color there. So I usually back off on that and try and not go white too quick.
All right. Painting sunsets.
Painting sunsets, just try to let the color come up, meaning sneak up on it. Sometimes you can go in too intensely vivid colors, where a more subtle start building up to those vivid colors, sneaking up on it, if you will, gives you a nice little play of light and kind of some drama that way.
All right. Talk to me about painting greens.
Painting greens. Put on your boots and your patience and your get all the brushes. Yeah. Painting greens are actually challenging, but one thing I have found is always try to bring in red. Bring red to your green. Because it's obviously, if you know your color wheel, it is a complement. But if you look down into the earth, there's red there. So if you can pull it up into your greens, it will tone them down and bring them earthy to where they're not like so loud and screaming.
Okay, a couple more. Creating distance.
Cool. Stay cool and pay attention to your values, but cool, cool, cool. Cool is the magic word, and watching your values.
All right. I notice you do a lot of florals as well. You do some still life, some garden work. Any thoughts on painting florals?
Well, the love of that is you can do them indoors, and that takes you back to that whole truthful thing that I talk about, painting from life. I don't get to do them as much as I used to because the market has dominated now into the landscapes for me. But I love them. I think they're a great tool because you can paint from life in the studio, and I'm drawn. I love flowers and the colorful, and I spent a lot of years in Santa Fe. I did much still life there and painted a lot of Talavera pottery, and I've been planning on going back that way a little bit and doing some more still life with Talavera. I have a big collection and a love for the color that's in that, but I think it's a great tool for people because you can set a small still life up in your studio and put a light on it and just practice. Don't put pressure on yourself, but just practice because what you do there will help you outside.
To that point, I was reading, I think I probably mentioned this on another podcast. I don't remember. I can't even remember, what I ate for breakfast. But I was reading Ives Gamble, who was the great Boston painter, who kind of revived realism. It's in the lineage of Jerome and Paxson and so on. And he was talking about plein air painting and the importance of doing figurative art to be a better plein air painter. You mentioned something about being in a life class or figurative or something earlier.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How does that inform plein air painting or landscape painting when you're doing something like figurative?
Well, it's training your eye to see. And to me, probably painting the figure, it's probably one of the harder subjects I believe that people can paint. But at the same time, there is that whole principle of seeing what light does on the flesh, and there's a lot of color there. And so you're training your eye to distinguish the colors that are within that subject and the reflected light and shadow. So, I think it does. I think anytime you paint from life in the studio, whether it be still life or figurative, is going to enhance you, outdoors too. And vice versa. I think painting outdoors, you're training your eye to where if you do come in to paint inside, it definitely helps you paint from photographs better.
So talk to me about the American Women Artists. You're a member, I think, I don't want to get it wrong, but I think you're a signature member. Is that right?
I'm master.
Master.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, forgive
master.
me.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
talk to me about the importance of that organization and just your thoughts on why that's important.
Well, American Women Artists, I joined it back in 2005. It was an avenue, and it still is an avenue for women getting started to get their work out in the public eye. It gives them an opportunity to jury in and to start showing their work and to be around other women, who support them. I was president of it in 2007 and 2008, and I put my work into doing, being a president because I felt like what I received from it was an opportunity to show in galleries and to get my work out there and just have somebody else supporting me. There's a lot of places, there's a lot of shows out there that people, can get involved in. American Women Artists was just to support women and to help them with their dreams and to help get them going. So I believe in that vision and we're now doing 25 museum shows in 25 years.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah, it is. And so it was established, several years ago, 22, 25, 26 years ago. when it was just a small number of women. And when it was a small number of women, it was women that I really looked up to in the art field. You know, they were people that were professional, just painting only, and I really looked up to those women. So in order, you know, to be around them, I wanted to get into the shows and things, and it just was a big blessing for me, and great friendships and, you know, long life friendships and that have grown from it. And I just want to support other women trying to get going.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really wonderful interview. You've done such a great job. But do you have any final thoughts for people that, anything you want to share?
You mean for students getting going?
Yeah, students or maybe people who want to get to the next level, or just anything that we haven't talked about yet that might be important to you.
You know, I just think you have to stay true to yourself, and don't try to paint to sell. If you're doing art fairs or things, even though, boy, don't we love sales, we do, and I get it. But as far as subject matter, don't try to jump on any kind of niche that you think these are selling, that's selling, but paint what is truly in your heart, what you believe in, what moves you, and you will produce the best work in that way. And then everything else follows. When you do what's true, when you do what's right, from the inside of you, who you are, then the other follows, and it will be good.
So one last thing. There's something that you're doing that I don't think most people are aware of. Tell me about that.
Besides being a painter, I am an associate pastor at a church, so I spend a great deal of time serving here and doing the work for the Lord. I preach quite often, and it's just part of who I am.
And how did this come about? Is this something that's fairly recent? Did you end up going to school? How did that all happen?
Actually, no. In 2007, I had a health issue, and someone had reached out to me from a particular church. So I actually had a encounter with the Lord over that, and the Lord drew me into this particular church, and I began to study the Word of God and develop this relationship with the Lord that I had not previously had, and begin to know Him. And as time went on, I grew, and I had just finished my term of American Women Artists President in 2008, and as I was going to church one morning, the witness of God in you, he says He'll witness to you. The Lord spoke to me on the inside and told me I would lead women in the ministry. And I thought and spoke back, well, I just know how to do that, Lord. I've just been practicing with American Women Artists, so I can do this. And at that point in time, that morning in church, I was approached by the lead pastor about starting a women's ministry. Huh. And I was like, that's awesome. I just heard that. And that was the beginning
Wait a minute.
journey.
You mean you didn't tell them? They came to you and said the same thing?
Oh, yeah. He came to me. Within 5 minutes, I'd gotten out of my car and walked into the church. And as I was walking down the hallway, the pastor came up to me. This is still a fairly new church, probably been a year and a half in the makings, and I'd been in there a year after it had started. And the pastor came up to me and said, I would like to talk to you after church. And I was like, oh, okay. And I probably looked like, what did I do or something, you know? Like I don't do anything there. So I thought I was in trouble.
Didn't like your
and
singing.
He said to me, I want to talk to you about starting the women's ministry here. And I looked at him, I'm like, I know. The Lord just spoke to me in the car, around the corner, coming. And he laughed, and he goes, you heard from God. And I'm like, I did. I heard from the Lord. And it was never really my intention to go into the ministry. It is not anything that I ever saw myself doing. So that branched that direction. I started the women's ministry in the church. That was in 2008. I preached to the women. I ministered to the women. And then in 2012, on New Year's Day, it was a Sunday morning, the Lord spoke to me about being a pastor at the church. And I argued with him about it a little because I was sure he was mistaken. I'm thinking he got his lines crossed or something. And it was a couple days later that the pastor came to me. And I'm really shortening this story for the sake of time, but he asked me if I had heard anything from the Lord in the last meeting, and I said, well, no, but I heard something the other day because the Lord had directed me in not doing a few other things in the church at that time that I was doing because there was more for me to do. And my pastor said, what did he tell you? And I said, well, he just said there was more work because I was not going to reveal what I actually had really heard because it felt sort of like, weird to me. And so the pastor said to me, did he tell you you would be associate pastor? And I about fell over. And I was like, oh my gosh, he did tell me that, but I just don't know that this is right. And my pastor said, no, I've known this for about a year. I've known this was coming. So that was in 2012, January, and then we went for a few months, and my pastor actually taught the church about women in the ministry for a few months. He did some teachings on it just to prepare people that women can be ministers, pastors, things of this sort. And then I think it was about in July or August or so, I was put into the office of associate pastor here at the church, and so I have been that since 2012. And it's just an amazing journey. And through all of that, the Lord has worked in my art, really changed me as an individual with my art and
I'm curious about that.
How really it has changed me in my art that I have so much more confidence in my painting, not because of my ability, but because who lives in me. And that he created this earth and he knows every particle out there. And so when I approach my work now, I talk to him, the greater one in me, because he can help direct me of what to paint, how to paint it, where to send it, and actually I talk to him before I go and apply to shows and before I go and do things. I seek his counsel, and it has always worked for me, Eric.
The Russians, when I was over in Russia one time, one of the Russians told me that his process of painting was a process of prayer and meditation, and that he entered into a state of prayer prior to doing any painting. And he said this is common among a lot of the Orthodox painters in Russia.
Wow. Well, I always lay hands on my canvas before I pray, because I have had times when I felt like when people look at my work, I want them to see more than paint.
So let me ask you this, because there's some people who are listening who might find this all just a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So
right.
When you feel like God is speaking to you, what is that like for you?
Well, when I believe the Lord is speaking to me, I make sure that I base it on what is written in His Word, meaning I spend a lot of time in the Word of God, so I understand what the Bible says, because that is the written Word. And there's a lot of voices out there that can come at people. So in order to base a very structured spiritual life and not get in the ditch on one side or the other, I always make sure that I stay on the Word of God. What I'm hearing from the Lord lines up with what His Word says.
So this is coming to you in the form of a thought, not a voice. I mean, can you distinguish between a thought and him speaking to you?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But basically, the Spirit of God lives in us, and the Word tells us that He'll witness to our spirit, and we know that our spirit is inside of us. We are spirit beings. So it's down inside of us, and it's going to enlighten our thoughts.
So how does somebody know? I'm getting way off track from PleinAir, but how does somebody know if somebody hears something, they're thinking something, and they feel like, is this God speaking to me? How do they know?
Well, I think it's going to depend on every individual and where they are in their walk with the Lord. I think that there are ways to test that, if you want to know the truth, because you can get quiet and you can start recognizing in you the Spirit of God. He lives in you. The Bible tells you He lives in you. The Bible tells you He'll show you and teach you things. But it is a faith walk, period. So you take these things by faith. I don't go by feelings and emotions, because they'll take you down a different road. But by faith, you know what His Word says. And then when I say test things, meaning if I'm unsure about it and it's a big decision and I think I heard from the Lord, then I make sure before I take a big step in ways of just getting quiet and spending time, and on the inside there's a witness. Like when people know, I probably shouldn't do that. I used to call that my intuition. Now I know that there's a Spirit of God in there trying to contend to direct you, because He wants you going down the right path. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, this is I think the first time we've had a dialogue like this on the PleinAir Podcast, and so I know that I know that sometimes these things would appear to be controversial to some people, and so I appreciate you sharing it openly and let our listeners make up their own minds about what they're hearing.
Right, and the proof in the pudding for me is how my life has gone, what God has done, and how I've followed His leadings. And I've just seen too many things happen over the last 10 years that I have no doubt His hand was in it. And I even talk about seeking Him. I'm going to do a one-woman show in 2020 at the Hockaday Museum, and they came to me and asked me if I would do a show. And I know that the favor of God was on my life. I've seen it too many times in areas of there's a lot of great painters out there. So I look at it like it's His favor. But I sought Him for a couple months before I took on that, because I don't want to hinder any work that He needs me to do through the church or helping other people. So it was kind of a cool thing, because I got a witness from the Lord, and He said, if you want to do it, do it. And that might sound funny to people, but the Lord will talk to people, just regular talk. He's your dad.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and that's a dimension that we don't very rarely ever get into in terms of people's spiritual life and their faith and so on. So, thanks for having the courage to share that. And
I understand. Because I am with you. I don't outwardly share it a lot. People may not even know that about me in all the shows and things. It's not something that I push on people. But there are times when there's opportunities that people come to me because they know. And, it's cool because I can minister to people. And so it's worth it.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you again for being on the PleinAir Podcast. This has been fun today.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. It was fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you again to Linda. It takes a lot of courage to bring up something so personal like that, especially these days. So, Linda, we're proud of you. Are you ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions, and you can always email me those questions or anything else. I'm always there for you. I answer every single email. Eric@PleinAirMagazine.com. Here is a question from Malakamic Art. I don't know what that is. Must be a Twitter handle or something. Malakamic says, should an artist pay for sponsored posts or not? I'm assuming the question is about sponsored posts on social media like Facebook or Instagram. I have a rule before I spend a dime on anything. I try to determine the following things, and these are important. Get a pen. Number one, what is my goal and my expected outcome from my ad? What do I hope will happen? Am I trying to get people to look at my art? Am I trying to get them to subscribe to my newsletter? Do I want them to follow me? Do I want them to attend a workshop? What's the one thing? Of course you want it all, but what's the one thing? Because that determines how you do it. Secondly, how do I get at least double my investment back? If I spend $10, then I personally expect to get $20 back, and hopefully a lot more. So what must happen for money to come back? What a lot of people find out when they ask themselves these questions is it's not easy to buy on your website or on your social media. There may be things that are blocking it. So if I'm not selling something on the spot, I have to ask myself, what's the value to me? So the value is branding, of course. It's valuable to get them on your newsletter, of course. It's valuable to get a name. But what if you get 10 people to subscribe and it costs you $10 each? Is it worth it? Is it worth $100 each? Is it worth $1,000 each? How do you know? If you have no idea if they are art buyers, art lovers who don't buy, or artists who may not buy, then don't spend the money. Go to places that you can target. Who's my exact target? How do I reach them? And then, can I afford repetition? You see, if you cannot afford repetition, you shouldn't be advertising, because repetition is one of the three legs of advertising. The three legs of advertising is media, market, and message. What media are you using? What is the market? And what is the message? And the message really comes down to your headlines and the content. But can I afford the repetition? Repetition is so important. It's rare that anybody responds to any marketing from one ad or one repetition. But if you can get somebody to see an ad 7 to 10 times within a certain period of time, it can work really, really well for you. I've watched artists go from paupers to having a lot of money because they just stick with it. They have the repetition. It takes a while, but if you're willing to be patient, that's what you need to do, repetition. And you also want to make sure that if you're reaching the right kind of people, the kind of people who will buy. So if I can't afford to make sure that the ad reaches the same person 7 to 10 times, it won't work. And typically, if I buy advertising for long periods of time. I usually sign 2, 3, 4-year contracts. And the reason I do that is because I know that it's that repetition over time that builds momentum over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. One time I got talked into buying an ad in an auction house magazine, and I thought, well, I'm going to reach all these rich collectors, and I'm going to sell a lot of subscriptions to Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. I ran a full-page ad. I paid many thousands. I think it was $18,000 for it, and I sold exactly 2 subscriptions. If I had to run that ad over and over and over and over again, I probably would have sold several thousand subscriptions, but I didn't do that. And of course, I didn't need that big of an ad to do that. So I learned my lesson. That's one of the ways we all learn, is that we make mistakes. So before you spend any money, don't throw your money away without knowing your goals and knowing your outcome. There's also a lot of people throw their money away with things like boost this post or sponsoring an ad, yet they have no goals, no outcomes, no specific financial goals. And without those things, you're throwing money away, whether it's social media ads or ads in one of my magazines, Fine Art Connoisseur or Plenary. It's not smart business until you have a goal. My sales organization will take you through your goals And if you don't know them, they'll help you understand what might be the right strategy to have in mind. So keep that in mind. Next question is from David Wood. David says, do you have any advice on writing an informative and engaging artist bio? David, the answer is yes. Thanks for asking. I have a rule. My rule is zig when everyone else zags. I get sent and read or exposed to literally hundreds of artist bios. And I'm usually gone within 10 seconds because they're boring. There is a rule in all advertising and everything that you do, whether it's your website, whether it's your business cards, whether it's your ads, whether it is your artist bio, everything you do needs to have headlines that sell. And selling is really relating to people, finding something that really gets their attention. You need a headline that makes me want to read the rest of the copy. You have to assume that if they don't read the headline, they won't read the first line. If they don't read the first line, they won't read the second line. There's a guy by the name of Sugarman who wrote a book for Advertising Age, and he talks about this. He calls it the slide. You got to get people to read that headline, enough people to read it. And of course, if you're doing email, you got to get them to read the subject line. If they don't open the email, if the subject line doesn't get their attention, it's not going to get them anything. So subject line and then headline, then first sentence and so on. And once they kind of start reading, then they'll keep reading. But you got to get them through that first paragraph, that second paragraph. And so you got to write things to pull them through. And artist bios tend to be really, really boring. Now, I have spent tens of thousands of dollars, I'm not kidding, tens of thousands of dollars taking courses and programs on reading books and watching videos on writing headlines. Research says that without a strong headline, there's only a 10% chance that someone will read anything further. When I'm writing headlines, I sometimes will write 20 or 50 headlines before I decide which one to use. Don't use the first 2 or 3 things you use. Keep coming up with ideas. I tell myself if I can't come up with 20, I'm not any good, right? So I write 20 headlines and then I go, all right, which is the best one? Which is going to get the most attention? And I have taken copy. We sell a lot of videos and things. I have taken copy on a product that bombed, rewritten the headline only and the first paragraph, and all of a sudden that product was a huge success. That's how much it matters. So it matters with your artist bio. It matters with everything you do because your goal is to get people to read it, to pay attention to you. So where I put most of my time is in writing, and I'm friends with some copywriters who make literally millions of dollars, and some get paid about $60,000 to $100,000 just for a single 2-page letter. That's how important it is. If you're selling books online or vitamins or something, a good letter can make the difference between 10,000 in sales and 10 million in sales. That's how important it is. So these copywriters are worth every penny because they know how to sell things with words. Each of us need to spend most of our time on our headline and then on our first or second paragraph when you're writing an artist bio or you're writing your website or you're writing your ad. And it doesn't hurt to get some professional help because I use professional help from time to time, although I've spent a lot of time learning and growing so that I can do them and make strong headlines. There's also this concept of the slide, right? I talked about that a minute ago. Imagine a playground. You climb the slide, you get to the top, and then you slide down. In copy, the headline is the top of the slide, or the first step on the slide. Second step is a powerful first sentence, which leads you to the third step, which is the second sentence. And then you get them to the top, and then you get them over, and then they slide down, and then they buy. All right? Now, if I were writing a killer artist bio, I'd tell a powerful story because, as I said in my Sunday coffee the other day, stories are one of the most effective forms of communication. No one buys on logic. And get that out of your head. Logic does not exist. Logic, facts, nobody cares. You've got to turn that into emotion. Emotion is what works, right? No one wants to hear that David Wood was born in a log cabin on a lake. But if your headline said, "How a House Fire Led a Young Survivor to Become an Important Artist," you'd get their attention. They're going to read the next line. And then you tell the story and you weave in everything you want them to know, and you stand a much better chance of reading the whole thing. I talk a lot about this in my videos. I think the very first video has all the information on how to tell stories and how to write stories and make stories about your artwork. Remember, making stories about your artwork and giving it to the gallery is really important because stories are easy to remember. They can pass them on to collectors, much easier to remember than facts. Ask yourself this also: what is the purpose of an artist's bio? It's really nothing more than a sales document. Its purpose is to make them want to own your work. It's got to give you credibility, but it's got to reach their heart. Facts don't reach the heart. Facts are boring. Another thing, always tell yourself to add which means. All right? So this is something that took me a long time to learn. You know, if you make a statement, let's say I make a statement that says David Wood is one of the top artists at Prix de West in 2019, which means you'll be getting one of the best pieces of Western art in your collection, which will go down in history as an important piece of art. So if you make a statement, ask yourself, how can I say which means? Now, you can say it different ways. You don't have to actually say those words, but try to find a way to translate for people. Don't assume they're going to know things on their own. Anytime you state something, state the benefit to the reader or the buyer, which is why which means is important. Also assume that they're not going to read it at all. And if they only read the opening paragraph, can you accomplish something in the opening paragraph that is going to get them to be interested in buying your art? So, like anything in marketing, and quite just like painting, there's a primary purpose, a focal point, right? There's a focal point in your artist bio. So I hope this marketing tip has been helpful. I went a little longer than normal, but I think it will really make the idea sink in for you. I hope so anyway. A reminder to get your tickets to the PleinAir convention. At least don't start whining when it sells out. Every year I get these people who call and they say, "Hey, Eric, can you get me in? You know, we're friends." And I can't. You know, the fire marshal sets the limits and I am not allowed to exceed them. And we're getting close. Get them at PleinAirConvention.com. And if you want PleinAir Magazine, go to PleinAirMagazine.com. You can get digital, print, both. And those of you around the world get that digital edition so you don't have to wait in the mail. We do 20% additional content and more photos and images and paintings in the digital edition than we do the print edition. So most people just get both. And if you've not seen my blog where I talk about life, art, and other things, it's called Sunday Coffee. It comes in your email box every Sunday. It's up to about 200,000 readers now. It's pretty incredible to me. I just can't even believe anybody would care what I have to say. Anyway, it's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. Always love doing this, spending time with you. Thank you. I'm kind of honored that you'd be listening in your car, in your studio, in your home, wherever you're listening. I'm really honored. Thank you. Let's do it again sometime, like maybe next week. I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhoads, and I'm the publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. That's what I'll be doing today. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.